everyone. Welcome to the Anexipod, the official podcast for Anexinet. This is episode 32, recorded May 4th, 2018. I'm your host, Ned Bellavance, Director of Cloud Solutions at Anexinet. Here on the Anexipod, we talk technology for the enterprise, covering infrastructure, app dev, analytics, and anything else that is shiny. On this episode, we are going to have a roundtable discussion with my fellow Anexinet co-workers, Brian Moffo, Mark Langsfeld, and Brian Atkiss. Welcome to the show, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Ned.
Appreciate it, Ned.
So, gentlemen, why don't you introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about what you do at Anexinet? We'll start with Mark.
Hey, my name is Mark Langsfeld. I head up analytics innovation for Anexinet, basically designing solutions that help clients make better decisions with data.
And this is Brian Atkiss, Director of Analytics at Anexinet, help with some pre-sales opportunities around analytics and our Listen Logic platform that analyzes unstructured data.
So I'm Brian Moffo. I'm a director in our delivery area of analytics. I pretty much do everything from BI through machine learning, and my team is the ones that are boots on the ground, basically.
All right, great. Thank you. So the purpose of this roundtable is to have an open discussion about the jump from BI, or business intelligence, to AI, or artificial intelligence. You guys all have some experience in both fields, and I want this to be an interactive discussion, so feel free to interrupt each other or me. But to start things off, I think it's important to define what we're talking about here. So overall, what do you define as BI, as AI, and where do you draw the line today?
So let's start with BI. I mean, essentially BI has always been that actionable intelligence you're going to take from looking at business reporting, dashboarding, scorecards, it's the traditional. It's led by humans. Humans are the ones that are looking at it. Humans are the ones that are making decisions. So they're using their experience to make those decisions. Versus AI is kind of almost the reverse, right? It's the computer that's making the decision based upon machine learning and automation and natural language processing. Those computer models are trained to learn and get better and understand. Mm-hmm. So I think they're both part of a well-rounded analytics solution, but I mean that's my kind of way of looking at it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we really think of BI to AI as a complete spectrum from a maturity standpoint. So BI tends to be more about what happened. You're looking retrospectively at data, versus AI is about automating with machine action a task. So typically we see when you have repetitive tasks that are taking place or actions, that's the perfect opportunity to look at how can we analyze, build a machine learning model, and then automate that process.
Yeah, and I would just add one thing. I think, in a traditional sense, BI, business intelligence, is really just understanding more about your data, about your customers, whatever it is. And I think artificial intelligence is really the next evolution within BI. I think it's still a part of business intelligence. It's ultimately just automating some of the tasks, calculating large data sets to just get better and smarter and faster.
And if you think about it, they both have the word intelligence in it. And that's really what you're looking at, right? You're looking
Sure.
at, one is, more of the older traditional way, one's the newer way, but I think they both play together.
And a big part of what you're seeing in AI today in this first generation of kind of commercialized use cases is around machine learning. And machine learning really does tend to work more with data and a lot of the situations we would see, play out are typically in the BI space. So, better classification of data, manipulation of data, that's really what we're seeing it play out.
Right. So I heard you mention automation several times when you're describing how AI kind of fits into the picture. And when you're looking to implement something like artificial intelligence, are there certain data sets or tasks that you found in your experience lend themselves to that sort of solution?
Yeah, Ned, again, it really comes back to that repetitive nature. So if a human is doing some task that tends to have, let's say, 10 different scenarios, and they have like a rule book that, okay, if this happens, then that happens. With these conditions, that's like the perfect opportunity to automate. Whereas if you have something that really does require a lot of like ad hoc type of analysis, or they're not repetitive tasks, honestly, I mean, you could create an algorithm to automate that, but it's not really useful in the sense that you could really, scale to a limited data set or limited use case. So replicating that repetitive, discovery is the key.
Yeah, and I would just add on to that, not only the type of data, but size of data as well. So even if you have that in the first scenario that Mark mentioned, but it's a small data set, you don't need to automate that. And also, you don't have enough data to build a training set. So if you have large data for those use cases, that's where it really comes into play, and that's where the automation is key.
Okay, so to sort of summarize there, you need a repeatable task that lends itself to being expressed as an algorithm, and you also need a large enough data set that can be operated against.
For scale and efficiency. Otherwise, if, like Brian said, if you have maybe 100 different columns or rows in an Excel file, to spend the time and investment to automate that task, let's say, the return's pretty limited. Versus, if you've got millions of records and millions of cases to plow through, that's like the perfect opportunity for automation.
Yeah, and I think we've come across some companies that hear about AI or machine learning and want to jump right in, but they don't have the data that supports it. And really, what they can currently do with more traditional means will satisfy everything they need, and it'll be cheaper. But as you get into more and more data and these repetitive tasks, that's where it really is key.
Mm-hmm. I definitely would say it makes sense to kind of size up the business opportunity. And if this is something you have, let's say, a couple of interns every day, plowing through and doing some process, the investment to automate would be pretty limited versus if you have something where you have 10, 100 people doing some task and, you can automate that. Certainly you can get better ROI.
Right, so a lot of what we're talking about here is automation of existing tasks, but I think there's probably a larger picture here where you're not just automating the task, but you're extracting additional intelligence or value out of that task. And maybe that draws on the machine learning component of things. Would that be accurate?
Absolutely. So in the sense that people only know what they know, and a machine can find much more signals in data sets that may not be recognized by a human. You can extract a whole new set of insights, specifically customer insights, let's say, about how maybe a customer feels or speaks, or maybe their actions from going to the website, then let's say calling in, and then tweeting and doing other tasks before they cancel. Seeing that hidden pattern is something an AI or machine learning algorithm can perfectly discover and then send out an action, whereas a human process just doesn't exist today.
Right, I guess to a certain degree, everybody is seeing things through the filter of their experience, whereas something like machine learning doesn't have that filter necessarily, so it can make unexpected correlations in the data that a human might just dismiss out of hand because it doesn't fit in that sort of purview.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and if you have two different humans doing the same task, this is where the machine is one machine, so you get a consistent result.
Yeah, data consistency, result consistency is a key benefit of automation and AI.
Right. Interesting. So a lot of the time when we talk about automation in infrastructure and operations standpoint, it's to remove manual human error to a certain degree, as well as make them more productive. So do you find that BI and AI help remove manual human error from an analytics process?
From a data classification point of view, I think the data consistency or the results consistency is a key benefit. And then it's really the human analysis to see how well does it predict, what is the outcome testing those results. And if you can build an algorithm that's very reliable and then it scales and it's repetitive and there's data integrity underneath it, then you have something.
So let's take it back to a more concrete example. Let's say I'm a traditional BI shop and I've got my data mart and data cubes and data lakes, or even a data ocean, I don't know, that seem to come up with a new data term every day, right? So how can I approach that information with artificial intelligence and maybe help me sort of define what those terms are? Because I hear them, data mart, data lake, et cetera, but I don't necessarily know what they mean from a BI standpoint.
All right. So, a data mart really is a single source. It's your single area, so it could be your sales. Only your sales are in there. It's kind of a subset of a data warehouse, per se.
Okay.
Data cubes are usually multidimensional, which means used more for reporting and not advanced analytics, but for analytics.
Okay.
Warehouse is really your structured storage area, where you're taking and you're putting in what they call dimensions and facts, so that you can use it for reporting and analysis. Data lake is really more of a storage for raw data.
Okay.
And you'll hear the term data lake a lot when they start talking about big data. Really, it's unstructured data. You can do some structuring in there, but it's usually in the flat format. And typically, a data lake is used within some type of machine learning algorithm. But there are also other ways of doing it. I mean, we have a partner in Muta who we use that can connect into a data source where you don't have to bring the data over and store it. Okay. So, really, when you're lakes, marts, warehouses, oceans, as you would call them, they're all really storage facilities for data.
Right.
When you're talking about machine learning, you don't necessarily have to always have it out of that storage facility you have for data. There are other ways of getting to data, using it. And sometimes those uses are one use, sometimes it's multiple uses. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, and the one thing I would say, Ned, to how you would get started, it's almost like I don't know that you'd want to start with we need a data lake. It's we have a specific use case, and then back into what you need from a data perspective. So, because quite often, you just say, hey, I want to build a machine learning algorithm. I need some artificial intelligence because my boss asked me to look into it. But realistically, if you have a specific use case that this can be solved for, you can go back and figure out what you need from a data perspective.
Yeah, I think when it really comes down to an organization deciding how to tackle AI, you can almost break it down into like the business opportunity. So what tasks, what part of the business, what drivers to the business, be it revenue creation, let's say operational efficiency, let's actually work to figure that out, like as far as a priority point of view. So which are the highest opportunities to go after? And then you have this notion of operational or organizational readiness. So does the data exist? Is there a data lake, or is this something we can tap in with APIs? Are there leaders? Is there a vision? Just getting everyone aligned to, okay, we're going to go after this task. This is the highest priority. Let's go. Then look to identify current pain points within the organization. So the bottlenecks, areas that we can certainly address. This sort of sizes up like the business opportunity for AI within the organization. And then you obviously have implementation, other types of dimensions to think about your initiative, and that really is a great framework to prioritize your AI initiatives.
And you're not looking at much different than the way you would look at business intelligence initiatives 10 years ago. It's still use case driven. And it's still, what is the value going to be back? What's the return on investment? So, you're still looking at that same way. You may just go about it a little bit differently, how you're going to put everything together.
Right. It sounds to me, and if I can kind of read that back, is you have to let the business drive why you're going to do, and then BI or AI is the what you're going to do to achieve whatever that business use is. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, it's a tool to carry out the task for the initiative of the business.
Absolutely.
So let's go walk down like maybe an actual example of where you've taken BI and moved into an AI sphere. Is there a particular, without naming names, can you give it an example of where you've actually had this whole maturity happen from one to the other?
Sure. I mean, I think definitely one example would be what we're doing in the healthcare space and life sciences specifically. And this is in the compliance area. There's a mandate to detect adverse events. This is when people describe having a side effect in relation to taking the brand medication of the companies. And that company is mandated to actually, first of all, log that, okay, this patient had this experience on this brand, so many milligrams, this is how they feel when they took it, and then they have to report that to the FDA. So that's a process that today, takes thousands of hours. There's literally hundreds of people within these organizations to both detect and then process and validate that discovery and then submit it to the FDA. We have BI systems that certainly would track, and they have analytics on what's going on with the reporting of what's having to do with those adverse events. But we, over the last, I would say, year, have been working with a number of large biotechs and taking that process and automating it with AI. So creating a training set, basically looking at all the underlying data, building an algorithm that contextually understands when someone's saying that they're getting a side effect from this drug, not some other thing. Maybe it's a commercial they saw on TV or other notions like that. So contextually relevant, it can actually score with the confidence level, the incident, and then not only detect, score, but then publish that into their compliance systems to be submitted. So that's an area where we've automated that task. Big win for these biotechs.
And that's a supervised learning method where the client actually has the ability to provide feedback on those scores and say, yes, this was an adverse event, no, this was not. That goes back into our training set and constantly learning and making the algorithm smarter and smarter.
Sure. Now, obviously, when you're talking about pharmaceuticals, there's definitely some security and privacy concerns that go along with that. And we're talking about, training machines, machine data to recognize these adverse events. What sort of security pieces need to be in place to protect the privacy of the individuals who are participating in it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, ultimately, there's a number of different approaches to this, and one of the approaches is to actually do all of this on-prem at a client site, so the algorithms can be built. You can connect to all their data within their data environments and do all the analysis there. Another option is to actually redact any of the private information, anything with their name, their account numbers, their social security number, whatever other personal information is in that data, and actually perform a redaction on that data before we do any of the analysis. And then you're taking the rest of the data where it's not meant to be a personalized view, it's meant to actually just classify each record and then send it back and connect to their data systems. That's one way that we've been able to do that.
Sure.
So really what we're saying is we're doing this within the governance that is defined with those particular organizations. So that's how you're talking about security and all that. It goes back to the old time calling it data governance back in the day for BI. That's going to go all the way through AI. You're still looking at the rules of the road for everything. So you've got to fit your analysis, your machine learning, you've got to fit everything still within those particular parameters in an organization. And if you're seeing where an organization is struggling, sometimes putting these out, that's where it's coming in at. It's from that governance standpoint.
Okay, so just because you move to a newer technology, quote unquote, with AI, doesn't mean you get to throw the governance handbook out the door. You still have to follow, some best practices and whatnot for that. And I know, Brian, you give a talk all about data governance. So how does this fit into the overall framework of BI and AI?
So when I talk about this, I still look at, as you go through a maturity model, BI is the foundation. And part of BI is still go back to things like governance. Now, people talk about master data management. Master data management is a part of governance. I don't know if that necessarily is going to be something that will be a part of AI going forward. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But the governance still is the rules of the road. So if you think about, you have a faucet there. Well, your IT department might be the one that's the plumber to put your faucet in, but the water running through it's the data. Both have to be governed, right? So if you got water running through there and the chlorine levels are through the roof, you're going to call your plumber or you're going to call the water company.
Right.
So you still have to have the rules on how much chlorine should be in that water. So you're still governing this data. You're still putting some rules of the road around it. Now, it may not happen in the very beginning. A lot of times you're going through and a scientist is looking at this data and saying, well, this is how we should. When you start using it for a business purpose, you're going to look at governance around this.
Mm-hmm. And certainly garbage in, garbage out as far as the results. So that doesn't change.
Yeah, and that hasn't changed since back in the day when everything started, back when they called this decision support.
Yeah.
All the way through. Garbage in, garbage out is still the same thing.
Oh, I remember DSS, Decision Support Systems, right?
Exactly.
I made a few of those in Excel. The ultimate BI tool, as far as I can tell, right?
Yeah. Believe me, there's still tons and tons of organizations that are out there who are still trying to run everything on Excel. We'll go in there and they'll say, we want to do machine learning when everything's still in Excel. So you still have to follow some of the rules of the road here. You still have to do some things to get yourself to that point.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, we keep coming back to this sort of maturity model of where you are on the path of analytics, I suppose. So the analytics maturity spectrum, let's call it. It seems like a good term as any. So what are the different points on that spectrum, and what do you need to do to move from one point to the next?
So we actually have one that we have published out on our site that we put together as an organization, and really moves from the traditional is really, you're getting reports every day, it tells you what happened. It's historical, right? You're looking at what happened. It could be 5 minutes ago, you're still looking at, that's still historical, so what happened? Then I think the next thing you're going to move into is maybe a little bit more analytics around why did it happen? Why did our sales go down? Maybe you'll do some little what if analysis and things like that. The next thing would be, how can we make it happen? How can we had a great last quarter? How can we do this again?
Or we see a top sales performer. Like, what about them can we replicate to make it the rest of our sales executives or force just as successful?
Exactly. And that's when you start really getting into transformational as an organization. And then really that automation, or that how do we take this and automate it so it happens all the time. So it's moving through there. And there's different things that are within there. There's different ways of looking at it. But moving through that spectrum, to me, BI is still foundational to a lot of organizations with this. Doesn't mean you can't go into an organization that's sitting in kind of that second spectrum there, and they're doing a little bit of why did it happen analytics, and not get them to machine learning and do it right then and there with them. But moving through that spectrum is a critical thing. And Mark wants to say a little more. But
yeah, I think that certainly at the last stage, and we really see maybe 3 or 4 different stages in the maturity spectrum. With foundational BI tool sets, so you need core, a cloud sort of infrastructure or on-prem infrastructure. You have, the database. You've got, processes like data governance and master data management, and those kind of core foundational components. Then you have things like visualization, data classification that sit on top. You can do more advanced reporting, let's say, with that. Then you have this layer of what we call omnichannel insight, and that's where you take all of your unstructured and structured data to basically bring it into one customer view and solve a number of business use cases. The latter step used to be called prescriptive analytics. Remember that day?
Yeah.
Remember prescriptive, the last 5-10 years? And that's an area that I think automation, AI, has certainly supplanted, because getting insight where you have a human figure out what's prescriptive versus the machine can take that action is ultimately what we want to see. And so that automation and AI has replaced that.
And then ultimately become predictive as well.
Yeah.
So going back to when we talked about moving from BI to AI, that maturity spectrum, that model there, that's the model of really getting there. Doesn't mean you have to do everything within between, but getting to certain points and certain things together before you start that's the critical piece.
Right, and I imagine within a large organization, there may be different pockets that are at different points in this maturity spectrum.
Absolutely. I mean, we go in and just do assessments just on where people are within that maturity spectrum, just to see if they're ready to do some of these things.
Right, yeah. If you don't have the block and tackling done, there's no way you're going to jump straight into the really advanced portions of things.
Yeah, and when we actually have a customer experience kickstart that we are just launching as we speak, and it's about is really helping clients understand that there's 6 primary use cases that we see out in the marketplace, at least in the commercial marketplace, and those tend to revolve around sales effectiveness, so making your sales force more productive, closing more business, customer churn, so mitigating cancellations, dealing with just the lifetime value of a customer and extending that as much as possible. This notion of compliance, and so that's what we talked about, the adverse event detection, customer satisfaction in general. So you have net promoter scores, all these other types of measurements through surveys that people have done for years. And it's biased in the sense that you have small response rates. They typically are email these days versus phone calls. You can work with all of your data now to get a much more comprehensive view of customer satisfaction. And then you have efficiency areas, so like the contact center is certainly an area that people want to focus on, extract that value, automate as much as possible. And then product quality is the 6th business use case, and that's where preventing people from returning, just product quality issues, proactively detecting that, and then just improving overall or less complaints, and so innovation of the product set's a key part there too.
Okay, so I mean those are obviously all business drivers that are you're going to see some gain when you implement the technology, as long as you have your technology aligned with your business use case. So another part of AI, and I've heard this before, is people are a little concerned that if AI gets implemented at their organization, they're going to lose their job because AI is going to come in and replace them. So have you heard that? Do you have thoughts around sort of what that could mean for Joe User, who's worried about being replaced by a machine?
I think that's been a worry for years, right? Everybody's worried about that. I look at it this way: if you're doing something that's a mundane manual task today, step by step by step, you probably should be looking at some other
career
enhancements because things like AI are going to replace that. But I think that there's still going to be roles within this entire analytics spectrum where they're going to need people that can understand the data. So if you really understand your business, understand what's going on, not just doing a task by task by task, there's going to be a role there for you.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So some roles, I think, if you're doing that mundane task, you should be concerned. I think anybody else, if you understand what's going on, there's always going to be a role.
But it also presents opportunities for those who want to get into fields like data science and really understanding how to use these algorithms and how to build these models and perform these types of automation processes. Ultimately, having that knowledge and being in control of the AI system is a huge opportunity for many people.
Sure. So to a certain degree, the technology is creating new opportunities for people in new roles. You just have to be ready to adapt from where you are today.
Yeah, and these are higher value roles in the sense that what you're bringing to the organization. So instead of doing that mundane task, that repetitive task, you're now training a machine on how to get smarter so that you can carry out that task in a much more efficient way and make better decisions with that. So again, it's a higher value position that you would have within the organization and an area where AI is really just amplifying your ability to conduct business yourself.
Right. No, that makes sense. So if you are someone who is finding yourself doing a mundane, repetitive task day in and day out for your work, that doesn't sound particularly fulfilling. Like, maybe you want to get a new job just because that current job stinks. Honestly, right? But there's also a decent-sized chance that at some point the business is going to implement some sort of AI that's going to replace that task. It's not replacing you per se. It's replacing the task that you're doing.
Right. That's right.
And this isn't new. This has been happening throughout industry for years and years and years. I mean, look at the automotive industry. How you had all the people on this person will put this bolt in, this one. That's kind of been replaced by robots doing that, but there's still got to be people there running the robots. So if you really understood that line and how to put things together on that line, you could drop the wrench and go and start working with the robot himself and go from there. So I think there is opportunity there, but you're going to need to train yourself up and learn some other skill sets there.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's say I am a business and I have like a traditional BI platform today and I'm looking to engage and move to the next phase. What would be sort of the process or the workflow for me to do that?
So I'm going to start with where they are.
Mm-hmm.
So if you say they have traditional business intelligence today, well, what does that really mean, right?
Sure.
So we got to see where they are. Got to see where they are, and then we got to see what the use cases are that's driving this.
Mm-hmm.
It could be as simple as, well, hey, we're doing some advanced analytics, and we just don't know how to go out from a big data perspective and get this other data we need. We can, pretty quickly get them into that. But if you have an organization that's been sitting there with pen and paper or Excel for years and they want to go from 0 to 100 right away, well, there's some steps we're going to need to take in between.
Right. So you
got to
make
sure we're capturing those data points you're going to need to make those decisions.
Yeah, you got to get the lay of the land first.
Yeah, exactly.
So an assessment.
Yeah, exactly.
Assessment. Yeah, assessment's a good way to start, but there's be a lot more work than just an assessment that'll go if they're in that lower quadrant there.
Right.
Yeah, we call it a business priority identification phase. So that's where you're taking your different data sets, the business drivers, and the business pain points, and the confluence of those sort of three, along with those use cases, bubbles up. Okay, here are the hot spots we should be going after and automating. From there, it's the assessment. It's maybe we could do a maturity assessment as far as your infrastructure, your people, your systems, and then bring you a roadmap of recommended actions, next steps, the near-term to short-term, medium-term initiatives that you should be taking to advance this path in your maturity.
So if people are interested in learning more, they can go on the Anexinet website and take that customer experience quiz today, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think that's about all the time we have for our roundtable day. Before we close out, gentlemen, is there any last thoughts or words on the topic you'd like to express?
No, I think don't be scared of AI. AI is a newer technology. It's been around actually for 50 years, but today with algorithms becoming much more readily available, the compute cost having come down to pennies compared to what used to be a lot more. it's all accessible today. And so it's one thing to go stand these things up and create a skunkworks organization within your company and then start to experiment. But we do have proven frameworks, methods, blueprints to modernize and take a company that's really traditionally a BI firm to help them automate. And so that's what we do here at Anexinet. And, feel free to reach out to us.
Awesome. Well, Brian, Mark, Brian, thank you so much for being on this show. It was a great opportunity to learn more about what we do in the analytics space and what AI and BI mean to everyone. That was our show with the Anexinet Analytics team. Thanks to the marketing team for helping me pull this together. Thanks to Anexinet for helping produce the podcast. If you're looking for a company to help you with your digital transformation, I would recommend reaching out to Anexinet, see how they can help. If you've enjoyed this episode of Anexipod, why not leave us a nice review on iTunes? If you're looking for more content, you can check out our sister podcast, Buffer Overflow. On the show, I am joined weekly by my co-host, Chris Hayner, to discuss what's new and interesting in the IT news sphere. You can find out more about me and what I am up to on Twitter at Ned1313 or on my website, nedinthecloud.com. Thanks for tuning in, and remember, IT moves pretty fast. If you don't stop to look around once in a while, you could miss it.